Right now, you believe you are thinking.
You believe there is something happening inside your skull that belongs entirely to you. A private interior world, a self that generates ideas the way a fire generates heat from within by its own nature. But what if that is the most comforting lie your brain has ever told you? What if every thought you have ever had, every opinion, every dream, every sudden idea in the shower was assembled from pieces you absorbed from other people without ever asking for them, without ever noticing? That is not a metaphor. That is not philosophy. That is what the science actually says.
And once you understand it, you will never think about thinking the same way again. Here is something researchers have known for decades but rarely say out loud. Your brain does not create, it recombines. It takes what it has received from the outside world. Language, images, emotions, stories, arguments, rhythms, and it shuffles those pieces into new arrangement. Some of those arrangements feel startling, some feel like revelation, but every single piece came from somewhere else first. Psychologist Leanne Young at Boston College studies how humans attribute mental states to others. Her work and the broader field she draws from points to the same unsettling conclusion. The mind is not a generator. It is a pattern matching machine that has learned, above all else, to pattern match on other minds. You are not born with thought. You are born with the capacity to absorb them. Think about the first ideas you ever had. You did not generate them in a vacuum. You were surrounded by adults who spoke, who pointed, who named things, who reacted with fear or joy or disgust to the world around them. Before you had words, you had their faces. Before you had logic, you had their rhythms. Your earliest thoughts were built entirely from the emotional and linguistic raw material that other people handed you, and you had no choice in the matter. You were an open vessel.
This is not a weakness. It was the strategy. For most of human evolutionary history, absorbing the thoughts of those around you was the most efficient survival mechanism your species had. If the elders said the red berries were poisonous, you did not need to test that yourself. You borrowed their knowledge. You installed it directly. Anthropologist Joseph Henrich at Harvard has spent years documenting how this process, what he calls cumulative cultural evolution, is the single most powerful thing that separates humans from every other animal on Earth. You do not just learn. You learn what others have learned, and then you pass it forward, updated by one small degree.
But here's where it gets strange. The system that was designed to help you survive also means that almost nothing you think is yours in the way you assume it is. Your political opinions. Where did those come from? Trace them back. You will find a parent, a teacher, a friend who said something that landed. You will find a headline that hit you at the right moment. You will find an argument you heard at 17 that felt so true you never questioned it again. You did not arrive at those views by sitting alone in a room and reasoning from first principles. You absorbed them the way a sponge absorbs water, and then your brain did what it always does. It built a story about why those views were obviously correct, obviously yours, obviously the product of your own careful thinking.
Psychologists call this confabulation. It is the brain's habit of generating explanations for things it did not actually decide. Neuroscientist Michael Gazzaniga spent decades studying split brain patients, people whose left and right brain hemispheres had been surgically disconnected, and he discovered something extraordinary. When the right hemisphere caused a behavior that the left hemisphere could not see or explain, the left hemisphere simply invented a reason, instantly, confidently, completely wrong. He called this the interpreter. And here's the disturbing part. The interpreter is always running in everyone, including you. Your brain is constantly generating the story of why you thought what you thought. And that story is almost always a reconstruction built after the fact.
So when you feel certain that an idea is yours, that you worked it out, that you arrived there through your own reasoning, what you may be feeling is the interpreter doing its job, narrating, filling in the blanks, building a coherent self out of borrowed material. Now you might push back here. You might say, what about creativity? What about the people who invented things that had never existed before? What about the artists, the scientists, the visionaries?
And this is where the research becomes genuinely fascinating. In 2012, cognitive scientist Mark Turner and others working in the field of conceptual blending published work showing that what humans call creativity is at its core the combination of existing mental spaces. You take a domain you know and you map its structure onto another domain. A brush is a tiny broom for your hair. A clock is a sun that moves indoors. A virus is an invader the body must expel. Every metaphor you have ever used, every analogy that made something suddenly clear, was built by blending two things that already existed in your mind, things you got from somewhere else. Einstein said his thought experiments were built from images he had absorbed in his childhood. Darwin wrote letters thanking other naturalists whose observations he had been quietly assembling for years before the idea of natural selection crystallized. Newton famously said he stood on the shoulders of giants. They were not being modest. They were describing the actual mechanism of their breakthrough. The original thinker is not someone who creates from nothing. The original thinker is someone who blends existing material in a combination that no one else had tried yet, which means originality is real. But it is not what you thought it was.
It is not a departure from the borrowed. It is the borrowed arranged differently. And here's the part that nobody talks about, because this process never stopped. Right now, as you listen to these words, your brain is not passively receiving information. It is actively comparing what it hears against every piece of prior knowledge it has stored, checking for patterns, looking for contradictions, tagging new material as useful or useless based on emotional cues that were installed in you years ago by other people. The thought you have after this video ends, the one that feels like your response, your reaction, your independent conclusion, will be built almost entirely from the material this video placed inside you, combined with the material that was already there, combined with whatever your body is feeling at that exact moment, which is itself shaped by things that happened to you years ago that you may not even remember. You are, in the most literal sense, a living archive of other people's thoughts, emotions, and ways of seeing. And so is everyone who ever influenced you.
Trace any idea far enough back and it dissolves into an endless web of human minds, each one borrowing, each one modifying by a fraction, each one believing, sincerely, completely, that they were thinking for themselves. There is something both humbling and freeing about this. Humbling, because the self you have been protecting and defending and presenting to the world is less original than you thought. The opinions you argue for, the tastes you wear as identity, the beliefs you would die for, all of them assembled piece by piece from what other people placed inside you. Freeing, because it means you are not supposed to be original in the way you were taught to value. You are not failing when your ideas rhyme with someone else's. You are doing exactly what the human mind was designed to do. You are part of a chain that stretches back through every mind that ever existed, each one carrying the thoughts of the ones that came before, each one adding one small arrangement no one had tried yet.
Right now, you think you are just listening, but your brain is already disassembling these ideas, sorting them into what fits with what it already knows, discarding what feels wrong, storing what feels useful, and quietly and visibly beginning to combine them with everything else you have ever been told.
By tomorrow, some of those combinations will feel like your own thoughts.
And they will be,
Just not only yours.
You began this wondering whether you have ever had a single original thought. And the answer, it turns out, is yes, but only because you were never meant to have it alone.